Now we've advanced the swing down to where, at a point where the club shaft is parallel to the ground. And again, I want to go to Mike for his insight, again starting with the most basic things that you see and then offering some more detailed checkpoints.
Well, again, I'd start with from the ground up. The hips have continued to move forward at this point while the head still remains still, which is starting to increase the tilt in the spine to the right. The handles continue to pull further away from the right shoulder, and the wrist cock at this point, because the right arm's begun to straighten more, the wrist cock's starting to come out. So it's less wrist cock here.
Very good, Mike. Is there more that you want to add?
Well, again, Andy mentioned in the last checkpoint, Grant's head is not raised up away from the ground. He's able to keep his head from raising up while his hips move forward.
Correct. So again, Mike, just to elaborate a little bit more on and add detail to what you said, from the ground up, you said his hips have continued to move forward. His left knee is still bent here, correct? Right. It's not straightened. And again, we make the point that the poorest golfers, their left knee is too far back and straightened too much at this point.
Right.
Okay, they don't go down quite long enough. As we work our way up to the hips, you mentioned that Grant's linear motion, the hip slide is continued. And you can see that by the weight being at 80-20 on the left at this point.
Right.
Correct? Now, you mentioned that the hands had pulled away from the right shoulder, and the left arm had pulled away from the right shoulder, and that the right arm had begun to straighten.
Right, and the club shaft here, when it reaches parallel to the ground, in line or slightly inside the hands. It's not outside the hands, so it's still tracing that uniform arc we talked about.
Correct. So just a little bit of detail on those wrists. We mentioned that the wrist cock hinges on the backstroke. It continues hinging all the way on the downstroke to the previous point where the left arm was parallel to the ground. And then the right arm begins to straighten, pushing out on the club, which sets in motion the uncocking of the club.
Right. Whip cracking effect.
And you can see right here that Grant has demonstrated that beautifully because he's able to keep his head still.
Right.
If he had kept the shaft too hinged or his right arm too bent, he would have had to start tilting his head back and up.
Right.
So by pulling the butt of the club away from the shoulder, straightening the right arm, he's setting in motion the uncocking of the wrists that serves to stabilize the axis of the turn. Now, you also mentioned in the left picture about how he's able to stay in the same incline to the ground that we said was the hallmark of a good swing. And I'd like to make two other notes here. You also notice how Grant's left arm is nearly vertical to the ground. That's a sign that he's continuing to trace the concentric circle, and that's an important reference that will begin to govern the angle of Grant's shaft coming through the ball, is the angle of that arm to the ground.
Right.
I also like to, on that left picture, make sure that one sees the checkpoint of where the shaft is starting to last pass through the torso, and you see that it's coming through the forearm. Right? That's a sign that the club, as Grant's hips have moved forward, that the shaft has gotten progressively shallower as his side bend has increased.
Right.
The final checkpoint that I would make to you, for you to be aware of when you're filming yourself from this, or when you're stopping yourself at this point where the shaft is parallel to the ground, was what you alluded to all the way up at the top with the head. Stable axis. Grant's axis of his turn is not moved. He's turning around the center of his shoulder turn. Okay? And we mentioned briefly that if you do not do the side tilting, extending, and sliding of the hips, that axis is going to move. Right? So we could go into an infinite amount of varieties of the swing, but if you know that rule, then you're equipped to start to figure out how to keep that axis stable.